I can tell you tonight we are hearing from one of the last people who potentially saw Riley before his trail stops.
I seen the guy that went missing. He came down through here. We heard a commotion. We looked back up. He almost fell over. The last bush right there caught him. He was very, very, very intoxicated, I guess.
I got nightmares in my head. I feel thoughts build up until I can't. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head. I feel the thoughts build up until I can't hear. That my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hello and a warm welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic voice in true crime. 22-year-old University of Missouri student Riley Strain was a finance major visiting Nashville with his Delta Chi fraternity brothers for an annual event. After the 6'7" student was booted from a bar, he told the group that he'd meet them back at their hotel. He was last seen at 9:52 p.m. on a Friday night on Gay Street in Nashville after drinking downtown. That was the night of March 8th. 2 weeks later, his body was found in the Cumberland River, which snakes through Nashville. Before we get to the rest of this case, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. Bear in mind, I've covered a lot of missing cases, both in the USA and Britain, and I've also written quite a few books on the same subject as well. If you're finding this analysis worthwhile, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. So, over the past 2 weeks, while the search for Riley was going on, there were a few sections of the true crime community that were pushing the foul play narrative. Do you know of a couple? Can you think of a couple? And yes, there was a discrepancy, for example, between how many drinks a bar said that they served Riley and how obviously drunk he appeared. Riley's last text, "Good lops," was also seen as some sort of cryptic message when really, there was one article saying this text raised 100 questions, when on the other hand, maybe it was just nothing more than a drunk text. Perhaps he meant to text lips, meaning good lips, because the I and O are next to each other, on the texting, if you're texting, the I and O are next to each other. I do think it's unfortunate that Riley didn't reach out to someone by phone when, of course, there was every opportunity to do so. But you can imagine if he can't walk straight, if he's stumbling, if he got lost, and also if he can't text really what he wants to say, then maybe that was beyond him. There was at least one dude on TikTok who seemed to suggest Riley had been abducted. Now, I looked at the evidence yesterday night briefly for about 5 minutes. I just highlighted a few stories that I was going to spend a bit more time on. It was the last thing I did last night, and I was going to spend the next day basically working on it, and I thought I would investigate the story while Riley was still missing, and in the meantime he was found. And then while driving to a barbecue and back, I decided, still based on that very cursory knowledge, that the likeliest outcome was that Riley had fallen into the river by accident. That was going to be my assessment. And this was without knowing the details of how drunk he was, watching any of the footage where he seems obviously drunk. It was really based on three factors. A, where Riley was last seen near the river. So I had seen a map showing like a little dot that he was very, very close to a river when he was last seen and when his phone last pinged. B, when he was last seen, so fairly late at night in the dark, close to 10 p.m. And then C, through intertextuality. And so let's talk about intertextuality for a second. What do I mean by that? Well, it is looking at the cases we've covered involving rivers and people disappearing. Those who know this channel know that over the Christmas period and slightly beyond the Christmas period, I covered 5 British women, I think it was 5, it may even have been more, who all disappeared near rivers. and were later found in rivers. Incidentally, Gloria Clark, the 8-year-old woman who was actually caught on CCTV entering the River Tees at 5:45 a.m. on New Year's Eve, well, her body has only just been found in the River Tees about 4 days ago, almost 2.5 months after she first went into the river. Nearly 3 months later. Now, like Gloria Clark, Riley moved some significant distance along the river, along the Cumberland River, as it bends before snagging somewhere in the river about 8 miles from where he likely fell in. Now, having paid more attention to this case, isn't the mystery here that this was a mystery in the first place? Because we can clearly see Riley isn't just intoxicated, but very, very drunk, and even stumbling and falling on camera. And I do think that this is yet another case. I'm obviously sensitive to the fact that this is a real person, that it's a 22-year-old. It's not just a statistic. It's not just a case. It's a real person that is now no longer with us, a real person that had his whole life ahead of him. But the other side of it is, you're dealing with a set of circumstances. Are you able to think critically about them? And so, if you apply the same scenario to him walking beside a river, the outcome is, I would say, logical. I mean, essentially, what he did was he took a wrong turn in the dark, was intoxicated, and got confused on terrain that he wasn't used to. And there was a river in the area. Now, you might say, well, yeah, it's logical in hindsight. And when someone has gone missing for 2 weeks, it does begin to look like something else. That was the speculative reasoning when Nicola Bulley went missing. As mentioned, Gloria Clark disappeared into the River Tees. The authorities could see exactly where and when she entered the river because it was captured on CCTV, and it still took almost 3 months to find her. We are going to have to learn that searching in water is a lot more complicated, a lot more difficult than we imagine. And in this case, searchers, after just a few days, were starting to abandon the river and head to a dam 40 miles away. Now, obviously, because of the science of decomposition, it does become easy to search for a body over time because they float. But what is the main difference between Gloria Clark and Riley Strain? What is the difference between these individuals in these cases? Well, I don't think Riley went into the river on purpose. But how do we know that? How can we know that for sure? Well, I think the answer is context. Gloria Clark's age, the time of the year that this happened, and other contextual factors are relevant in her case. In the same way, Riley's age and what he was seen doing, partying, having fun, reveling, meeting and texting a girl, heading back to his hotel, basically doing what students do, also provides us with an innocent and accidental context. By the way, Gloria Clark got up very early in the morning before anyone was awake and walked directly to where she entered the river. Whereas you can see the way that Riley walked was very kind of random and impulsive and sort of stop and start. You might ask, okay, so why didn't I cover this case from the beginning? Well, for starters, I was in another country. I was on the road. I was in Namibia when Riley disappeared. Some of my subs were encouraging me to cover it, and I have to admit, even if I was in my office, I think there would have been a certain reluctance. Even when I got back, I think there was a certain reluctance. Why? Well, after covering so many of these cases back to back, and obviously I think what has happened to these women in Britain is a different scenario psychologically. I've got to admit it was starting to affect me psychologically. Also, an old acquaintance of mine, not my friend Alex, someone else, recently died tragically, and all of that takes you down a very uncomfortable road, and one's got to guard one's mind. And so this is probably one of the reasons I didn't respond very quickly to the Riley Strain case. But now that we're here, why is it likely Riley Strain wasn't the victim of foul play? Well, as far as I know, his watch was still on him. I'm not sure if his phone was. It appears he dropped his bank card near to where he was last seen. He was also still wearing the clothing he was last seen wearing. Now, if his bank card had disappeared, then that would be a different story, but they found his bank card. Also, when an eyewitness says they saw him stumble and almost fall into the river, just because it's a transient doesn't mean what they saw isn't accurate. When the transient says the last bush caught him, it means the last bush before the river caught him. In other words, he saw him almost fall into the river. And then obviously after that, he did fall into the river. Riley's parents understandably are distraught and wish those around Riley had assisted him. It's an understandable sentiment, but the reality is it was up to the transients to assist Riley, because that's where he was at that time. But let's face it, when last did you come to the aid of a transient? When last did you expect a transient to come to your aid? These are folks obviously in some distress themselves. Still, had they paid a little more attention, perhaps they may have heard the splash when Riley fell in. And who knows, someone who may have been a hero today, might have been a hero today because of just being a little bit more alert. And guess what? Riley could have spent the rest of his life, he would have had the rest of his life ahead of him. Put up your hands. How many of you here think this case is very similar to Kylie Rodney? A young person drinks too much, takes a wrong turn, and in the dark gets disoriented and ends up falling into water and drowning. Probably there are folks here who still believe Kylie Rodney was a victim of foul play, because we like to think it's more likely that a stranger will attack and murder a person than someone they know. Do you think that's right? And that both those outcomes are more likely than self-harm. Do you know by far the most murders are caused by people who know each other than by strangers? And did you know that more people in America are fatally injured on purpose by themselves than are murdered, whether by acquaintances or strangers? This suggests the person we have to be most careful of in terms of our actions and our thoughts, where we've got to be vigilant and alert, is ourselves. We must pay attention to our surroundings. We must pay attention, we must guard our thoughts. We must notice when things are escalating out of control, including when we get intoxicated. Now, if you're one of the Kylie was a victim of foul play diehards, you should consider the lesson that's not being learned here. I mean, if you're going to choose to take that route. I know as a young man, I did my fair share of not terribly smart things while I was under the influence. Quite a few pop into my head, but one of the least embarrassing was getting drunk in the Philippines, walking along a narrow wall above a beach, and then falling down on the other side. Thankfully, there was soft sand on the other side, but it's these situations and many more that can lead to serious injury and even death. Many of us have escaped some of these misadventures for no better reason than because we were lucky. I know I was. But hopefully we remember them, we learn from them, and are more careful with our lives getting older. When I went to Namibia, my father told me he got 3 flat tires driving on those long gravel roads, and you can look at Team Peachtree. I've put some videos there on our journey through Namibia. And so I challenged myself to not get a single flat tire, even though I was using inferior tires, 2-ply instead of 3-ply. And guess what? Just by being vigilant, just by being careful, I managed to go there and get back without any punctures. Now, if you think people come to harm always because of someone else, always because some stranger is to blame, and it's never your responsibility, well, you stand a good chance of repeating your own mistakes. Make no mistake, I'm not blaming Riley for what happened to him, because as I say, if we were unlucky and took a wrong turn, the same could have happened to us easily. Who knows, perhaps Riley's death will lead to fraternities taking greater care to follow up on the well-being of their mates and may actually save lives in future. I'm not going to take it any further than that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.